Welcome to the Funk Heritage Museum, founded in 1999 by Dr. James Funk. It has been a part of Reinhardt for quite some time. As soon as you enter the Funk Heritage Center, you'll be greeted by this bus. And those are artifacts and paintings from the museum. Funk Heritage Center was established by James Funk in 1999. The Funk Heritage Center is actually a certified National Park Service Trail of Tears interpretive center. These are the ancient artifacts that the Native Americans used. And here in the Hall of Ancients, it tells of their livelihood from the different eras of and tribes of Native Americans, from the Cherokees to the Creeks to the Muscogees, and these are more tools that the Native Americans used for their livelihood.
I'm here with Dr. Kitchens. He is the director of the Funk Heritage Museum, and I'm going to ask him a few questions about a few things pertaining to the museum itself. Right here we have a figure on the wall. Do you think you can give us a little more information about this?
Sure, it's part of southeastern Indian mythology. It's called an Uktana, and what you'll see is it's a serpent with horns, but it also has a feathered wing on it. This is a theme that you find throughout the Americas of these winged reptiles. But in southeastern culture, almost every mythological creature is from two worlds. In other words, he's a cross between known types of animals. They particularly admire amphibians, for example, who can live part of their life in the water and part on land. But the mythology here is that if you encounter this creature in the woods, he has a medallion, a gem in his forehead, and you have to pluck that out, which shows a lot of courage, or you will die. It's a curse, in other words. And so anyone who dies under mysterious circumstances, sometimes their death is explained away by he saw the Uktana in the woods. So it's quite a piece of mythology. Of course, by the 19th century, there aren't many Cherokee who are thinking in those terms. They're more educated and much less oriented toward their mythology. These are lithics. That is, they're stone implements, mostly projectile points from various periods of Indian history, some of them going back more than 10,000 years. When in the Paleo period it's mostly a hunter culture, and as the population grows and they become more stationary, you get a little cruder weapons, and I'm putting this in relatively simple terms. But you can see here, these are not arrowheads, although we call them arrowheads. They're projectile points. They're used mostly on spears, or they're used with an atlatl, which is a thrown dart. But you see they get more crude as time goes on. And we also see the introduction of this pottery. This is a stamped type of pottery. You might use a piece of woven fiber to pat the wet clay with, so it yielded a pattern when you cured it and fired it. And this is the period, the Mississippian era is the era just before the European discovery, and it ends with the European discovery. And it's characterized mostly by these very delicate liths or projectile points. Those are little tiny arrowheads. Apparently the bow is not invented until relatively late. And you can easily see that if you used a spear point size head on an arrow, it wouldn't go very far. But this is a hand axe, probably celt or kelp. And you can see the pottery gets more sophisticated. Why? Because they're less reliant on hunting and more reliant on farming. Have to have a way to cook their things and preserve them in ceramics. That's what a pot is, ceramics. And they also use tobacco as a, for ceremonial reasons. It's used to meditate, but it's also used to send the spirits, the spirit of prayer and worship to God. The Southeastern culture, particularly the most recent, the Cherokee, the Creeks, they're monotheistic. They essentially believe there's one great invisible God, as you and I do, or as I should say, as Christians typically do. And there's a good bit of ethical belief within that context about how you treat family members, how you treat members of the opposite sex, how children are to be treated, things you find in every culture around the world. So this is that's kind of it in a nutshell. By the time the Europeans get here, though, Native Americans are only using metals very sparingly. They may hammer out copper, but you don't find iron implements. You don't find bronze. You don't find instruments that are made out of mixtures of metal. Nothing like that. There's no real metallurgy, although there is decorative use of metals. So the new iron culture that arrives in the New World with the Europeans is overwhelming, for one thing, because it permits firearms, guns. And guns come to be traded very easily and freely with Native people because the basis of their relationship, at least in the Southeast, is they're trading deerskin for Western goods. The Creeks at the height of the deerskin trade are harvesting native deerskin a year. That's incredible. This is $1 billion a year industry. And it's being subsidized by the British government to try to keep native peoples living in harmony with the European settlers on the frontier. So that's down to the 18th century right there. It's pretty fast stuff.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate the time, and
yeah.
We appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have the Woodland period. And what the Woodland period did was it brought back a lot of the warm and wet temperatures of the previous Paleo period, and they began to rely a lot on hunting and fishing during this time. And there was good evidence of things such as sunflower seeds and stuff like that that began to evolve and were more prevalent at this time. A massive trade network was actually developed during this time in the Middle Woodland area of Illinois and Ohio, and a lot of technological, social, and religious developments also happened at this time. And moving along, we have the Mississippian period, and what happened in the Mississippian period was even more complex societies in North America. A lot of food was grown in small gardens, and tools like stone axes, digging sticks were all implemented. Corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and other wild plants were cultivated at this time as well. Hunting for stuff like deer and turkeys and other small animals became more prevalent. And a lot of these people were farmers, so they lived along rivers. So they had to they really kept their gardening productive, basically. And it also the Europeans also began to come at this time towards the very end of it. And what happened was they basically just brought a lot of diseases to the native populations in areas around it. So, and moving to historic. The historic period, it marked a lot of biological, cultural, and material exchanges. Europeans began to flock at this time, and at first they brought the Indians presents such as glass beads, mirrors, hatchets, kettles, as a sign of basically goodwill. and they also brought cattle and sheep. They brought baking ovens, which helped with obviously firewood and stuff. And they also organized Indian laborers to expand the irrigation canals that the Indians have already developed. And obviously, we know the rest. Soon they began to disrespect the natives. Native religions was suppressed. Indians who resisted were subsequently physically abused, and traditional family relationships were discouraged at that time. And wars were fought, and it obviously eventually led to the Trail of Tears. So.
Imported on the frontier. This is a broad axe, and you'll notice, of course, it's broad, but it's used as a plane to flatten out the side of a log or a piece of wood. If I turn it over, you'll see it's not sharpened on this side. It's not beveled at all. That's why you can plane with it, and it would never be used for chopping wood. That's not what it's for. If you were chopping wood, you would use an axe. And you can see the axe is sharpened on both sides so that it functions like a wedge to break down into the wood. And this is called a froe. And you'll see that it's sharp on the downhill side like this. The handle is just to hold it in place. And you have to have a mallet of some kind to do this. But then and it's used to split wood. This isn't splitting because it has a knot in it. But as you do this, it gets easier and easier, and you rock the froe back and forth in what's called a to and fro manner. That's where our expression to and fro comes from a fro. Well, I'll make that a Sunday project.
So do the Native Americans have any of these tools, or only the settlers?
Just as soon as they could buy them, just as soon as they could trade deer skin for them, they would have the same blacksmithing tools, the same rifles, they would have the same equipment. And that's what stimulates the trade. Indians, Native Americans, the Cherokee, the Creeks, the Chickasaw, they want these European goods because it makes life easier for them. Would you rather have a stone axe that you can fashion quickly and is very sharp but only lasts a short time, or a steel axe, an iron axe that will last for years? Well, of course, you want an iron axe. Well, that's about it.
Gifts that are Native American inspired. Some of them are even handmade. And then you can get other memorabilia like t-shirts, bracelets. You can even get books to educate yourself on the Native American culture. And here is some homemade soap. So this is like something that they would use. So the descendants of the Native Americans are currently on reservations such as Oklahoma, and they keep their culture alive by making stuff, and they preserve it by their dances and their music. And here are some Native American type albums that you can purchase. Right here. And the books again. And these are candles. And like even wood art. So when you stop by the Funk Heritage Center, make sure to make your way to the gift shop and purchase.